within that letter is an offer from Roberta Laundrie to assist her son. Someone should ask him to release the letter that Roberta Laundrie wrote to Brian Laundrie. That on the envelope says, "Burn after you read this."
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, there's a second letter that has come out, Roberta Laundrie offering to assist Brian. So the drama and intrigue continues. Besides Brian's 8-page bogus confession, another note was recovered from his things, presumably, and this is a presumption I made. I'm going to have to correct that, but I'll do that a little bit later in this video. I presume that this note was recovered in the same plastic protection in the dry bag, but this one written by Roberta Laundrie. But in any event, Brian's mother told Brian, burn this after reading. Well, clearly he didn't. Before we get to the rest of this episode, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. I will be putting up quite a bit of Gabby Petito related content over the next few days. Like, share, leave a comment. You can express your thanks by hitting the thanks icon. And let's get started. So Brian Enton tweeted yesterday, just interviewed Petito attorney. He says to his surprise, when he showed up to the FBI to get evidence, and this was just a couple of days ago, this wasn't way back when Brian's remains were found and the dry bag was found. This is another visit to the FBI recently. He said there was a letter from Roberta Laundrie to Brian, and she wrote this burn after reading letter to him, and then he talks about it in an interview. I've just quoted from that interview. I'll put a link to the full interview in the description, and you can watch that there. Now, in Roberta's letter, she presents apparently scenarios. This is according to this Petito attorney. One of them is, if you go to jail, I'll bake a cake. And then he says, and put a knife, and he corrects himself to say, or a saw in it. Now, you would assume that the saw is some kind of, if you've watched too many Escape from Alcatraz movies or the Shawshank Redemption, you sort of imagine that that's how you can break out of jail with a saw. Well, not really. It's a little bit fantastical. But I think it's more what the letter symbolizes that's important. The letter also references Gabby. And in the interview with Brian Enton, this attorney basically says that when the Bertolina, I think it was Steve Bertolina, when the Laundrie attorney saw this letter, there was a kind of a look on his face. He seemed quite shocked and quite surprised. And so it's possible that this letter may be a game changer, not only for the Laundries, but also for the Petitos in terms of their lawsuit. Now, all of this obviously and clearly addresses the idea that we've been speculating on all along. We were speculating on during the entire fugitive phase of Brian's, when people were looking for Brian. And we were wondering, did they know what happened to Gabby? We were also wondering whether this Petito lawsuit was fruitless and frivolous. I mean, was it also kind of wishful thinking? Because based on what we knew, it didn't seem very likely that the Petitos could prove that the Laundries knew what happened to Gabby. But what if there was something we didn't know? Well, this could be it. This could be that something. This could be the thing that is kind of irrefutable evidence. The problem is that there's no date on this particular letter, and that is a little bit problematic potentially. Now, as I mentioned in a previous analysis, what Brian wrote in his note is likely a similar story to what he told his parents. Obviously, that's speculation. That's also an inference. But is it a reasonable inference that something did happen to Gabby, but it was a tragic accident? If what the Petito attorney says is accurate, then the note saying effectively, I'll help you to get out of jail, if you do go to jail. And I think this adds me to the idea of the Laundries wanting to help Brian whether or not he's guilty. It may also have been a desperate plea from a loving mother, from Roberta, to persuade Brian not to go into the swamp with his father's gun, or not to go through with his fatal final camping trip. But it also raises another very interesting scenario. Remember this. Remember when the Laundries headed into camp first thing on October 20th, the moment the water receded, to try to find Brian? Or were they worried about Roberta's note? Now, this is my thinking, and this is how I sort of explored the idea. I kind of just went through some of the media narrative, and I looked at, what if Brian didn't burn the note? What if he went into the woods, went into the swamp, but he didn't have anything to burn it with, and perhaps he just forgot about it? What if the authorities found it, and what if the Laundries were worrying about that? What if Roberta had written a note, told her husband about it, and now they were both worrying about it being out there? What if it came to light? Well, it seems now it has, or it will soon. Apparently where this note is, it's in the possession of the Laundrie attorney. The Petito attorney's seen it, but doesn't have a copy of it, and presumably will be furnished with one soon. Maybe that presumption's not right either. Anyway, I seem to remember when the Laundries entered the park, they were being shadowed by two reporters. At least one was from Fox News, maybe both. One was a videographer, and there was another reporter. I'm fuzzy on the details, but I had the impression the Laundries wanted them to back off. They wanted to give them a little bit of distance while they went into the woods. To their credit, the reporters saw Chris recover Brian's dry bag, which had the notebook, and I assumed Roberta's letter inside. But there was little he could do because a reporter was watching him. So I kind of had this furtive assumption that they wanted to kind of quickly retrieve Roberta's letter, and if it was there, and then sort of stuff it into their pockets or whatever, remove it from the scene. That was my assumption. It's also interesting that Brian's parents not only found the bag, which I was saying, could potentially be implicating them in something through this note, but didn't seem to find Brian or his backpack or anything else, all of which was nearby. It suggests that the dry bag was what they were looking for. But I think one's got to just be explicit and say, it turns out that the note apparently was recovered during a search warrant, and there was a search warrant executed on September 20th, the day after Gabby's remains were found. The other thing that I think is important to note is that it was recovered from the Laundrie home. So obviously it wasn't recovered from the bag. But anyway, reading through the media narrative, it seemed like, could it be that they were looking for the note in the bag? Maybe the Laundries didn't know that this note had been recovered, right? Maybe they just didn't know that. Anyway, so if we go to the Sun, it says, Bertolino explained that it was Chris who found Brian's white plastic dry bag in full view of a news reporter who was about 20 feet off the trail, while police uncovered his backpack and human remains. Chris didn't want to pick the bag up because he wanted law enforcement to see it, Bertolino said. Oh, really? Did Chris not want to pick the bag up? Didn't he want to look inside? Then he said, this is what Bertolino said, that all of this was caught on camera. Well, exactly. If it was caught on camera, anything he did that wasn't above board would be captured on camera. He didn't really have the freedom to do exactly as he pleased. The article goes on to say Chris couldn't find law enforcement because they were then out of sight, because Chris had been in the woods. So he didn't want to leave the bag there with a news reporter standing nearby, so he picked it up. So it's quite an ironic situation where the person playing the role of the guardian of the evidence and also the person that is really like almost doing a stakeout of the Laundries are the news reporters. So it goes on to say, once he found the item, that's the dry bag, Bertolino insists that Chris informed authorities. But one must also wonder, if the authorities weren't there and the news reporters weren't there, what would they have done? What would they have done based on what had been taking place before that? Then the burn after reading letter should also be seen in the context of what the Laundrie's attorney, Steve Bertolino, told the media at the time. And this is according to TMZ. This is from the 26th of October 2021. Family attorney says parents in the dark on journal and why he ran. And this is a quote from TMZ. Brian's parents, Chris and Roberta, have no idea why their son fled with such angst the day he went missing in September. He would only say they felt he was out of sorts. Obviously, everyone wants to know exactly what the parents knew and when, but Bertolino insists they were in the dark on what the heck was happening with Brian as he fled from the house and vanished. He says ditto on what might be in Brian's journal. Remember, these are references to a journal, and what was eventually recovered was something that looks a little bit like a small little notepad, the sort of thing that traffic cops might use. You know, it's about the size of your hand. It's not very big. And anyway, so they say this is what authorities found near his remains. So where is this journal? Bertolino says cops haven't made the Laundries aware of its content yet, but says he has heard some of it may not be salvageable. Well, it seems that everything so far has been salvageable. Bertolino went on to say that it's a tragic end and his clients don't have any more information to help law enforcement solve the outstanding mysteries. Well, except for the salvable information that was inside the dry bag. Then there's another article from Fox News around the same time, this time written by the self-same reporters that were tailing, then shadowing the Laundries, doing really what the cops should have been doing. And it just describes Chris as zigzagging through the brush and eventually stumbling upon a dry bag in the clearing. And then Bertolino saying, I don't think they realized what it was when they found it at the time. Well, perhaps they did know what it was. Perhaps they were worried it contained Roberta's burn after reading note, and now it seems like it didn't. We know that the note was actually recovered from the home, but I don't know whether Roberta would have known that. Maybe she was worried that he'd taken it with him. I also found this snippet, according to The Sun. Steve Bertolino said, referring to Brian, he just did not seem himself. As Roberta pointed out, you just do not know what someone is thinking inside. Really, did Roberta have no idea what Brian was thinking? When we accept the ridiculousness of Brian's version in his bogus confession, the one I dealt with in the live, the 8-page letter, just how ridiculous that bogus version is. We see similarly ridiculous post-meditation elsewhere. If you go to Fox News, it refers to Brian Laundrie attempting to mislead the FBI, mislead the authorities by having fake text conversations with himself using Gabby's phone. So it sounds like he would send a message to Gabby's phone, then he has her phone, then he sends a message back to himself. And according to the FBI, quote, the timing and content of these messages are indicative of Mr. Laundrie, that's Brian, attempting to deceive law enforcement by giving the impression that Ms. Petita was still alive, end quote. And that is from the FBI's final statement on the case. And so, if Brian was this deceptive, manipulative, and misleading, where did he learn it from? And then a final twist. I was expecting Brian's notebook to contain sketches and other ruminations, other things that were sort of coming up during their van life trip, not just the final note. The 8-page note seems to come from a separate notebook, an even smaller notebook, not this one. So where is it? And where is Gabby's journal? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.